And now for something completely machinima. Hello, I'm Tracy Harwood. Welcome to a special episode of Completely Machinima. And today I have the pleasure of talking to Andrew Knight, who works as a professional in the filmmaking industry, but who also is very passionate about machinima, one series of which we are going to be reviewing in our March podcast. And lucky us, we're going to be talking to him about that later today. Now, Andrew got in touch a couple of months back, having seen, well, in fact, says he's seen more than one of our episodes, which is great. When we were talking about the great late Peter Rasmussen's Stolen Life, which he produced with Jackie Turner. In fact, it turns out that he was in Melbourne when Stolen Life was released in 2007, and was heavily involved with the Australian Centre for the Moving Images Machinima Film Festival, at which I think Rooster Teeth and members from the Academy of Machinima Arts and Sciences, folks like Paul Marino and Friedrich Kirschner, presented at the time. But again, we'll double check that with Andrew in a minute. Let's start anyway. Let's just get on with the interview, I think. Andrew, it's really great to have you with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It's lovely to meet you. Start by telling us a little bit about your journey with machinima then.
Sure. So I think, like a lot of people, my introduction to machinima was with Red versus Blue, the Rooster Teeth series, which a friend of mine introduced me to, in season one. So it was quite early in that. And as much as I loved the show, that there was very much seeing that there was this idea of, I think I'd like to have a go at that. Not specifically Halo. I've always wanted to try to choose different games that I haven't seen machinima in with my machinima, rather than using. I just like the idea of, well, certainly not wanting to be seen as a copycat, but just liking the challenge of doing something new. So as an avid PC gamer, that was just something that became part of my consumption of video games, was thinking, would this be a good game for making machinima in? And I tried a lot of different games, and made machinima in a few different games. But as you mentioned, I'm from Melbourne, and there's the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, or ACME as it's known, which were a big proponent of machinima in those early years, and used to run a machinima film festival. It wasn't so much a film festival, I'd say, as it was a machinima showcase.
Yeah.
Where it's not so much that films were, competing for awards or something like that. It was very much a showcase where they would get, machinima filmmakers from all over the world, and invite them to showcase their work, and also invited local filmmakers to showcase their work as well. And I'm a bit foggy on the timeline. It was something that they used to run every year for a number of years, and I can't remember when it started and when it finished, but I feel like I probably went to all of them. And I think for the first one or two, I didn't have anything to present myself. And I really wanted to make something, but it was just not knowing how. I was already, working in, at the time I was working for a company which built and supported post-production equipment. So it was a company that built, workstations and hardware for people in video post-production. So I was already fairly well across that, but just the idea of how to actually go about capturing images from a video game to make it was the sort of first barrier. And I went around it in a very sort of roundabout way. I wasn't familiar with software like Fraps or anything like that, and had I known, I would have used that. But I actually devised this system where I took a feed out of an analog output on my graphics card, and fed it through an analog to digital converter that I borrowed from work, and then fed that into a digital video camera. So I was actually recording stuff from the video game on DV tape.
Right.
And that was sort of a very roundabout way of doing it. And so I made my first machinima, which was a little mini series called Once Were Clone Warriors. and there was a famous New Zealand film called Once Were Warriors, starring Tamira Morrison. And so I'd sort of taken snippets of that and put it under footage from Star Wars Battlefront, sort of with the idea that Tamira Morrison voiced all of the clones in Star Wars, and so it made sense that his voice would be the voice of those clone troopers. But I was using stuff from that film, which is it's quite a heavy film. It's about domestic violence and alcoholism and all this sort of stuff, and so that was sort of my little take on because I didn't feel confident to do voice acting or something like that, so I used the audio from that film, and that was the first thing that I made, and that I then submitted to Acme for the film festival that year, and they said it's really great, but you're the only person that submitted. So, so we've decided not to do the sort of homegrown section of this festival. And what
Oh,
I'd made wasn't up to a high enough standard to include in the worldwide showcase. So it didn't actually get screened, unfortunately. But I did get to show it to the Rooster Teeth guys and Paul Marino and other people. And I'm not sure if I don't think Peter Rasmussen saw it, but certainly Jackie did. And so I just took my laptop around to them, in the after party drinks and said, "Hey, this is what I'm doing." So it kind of got screened in a very roundabout way. So that's how that once that started, I was hooked and went on from there.
we still got a link to this, yes?
Um, okay, so. And this is where I'm a little bit hesitant because I've got two YouTube channels. I've got the one that I've sent to you as well. And
Mm.
I have another YouTube channel which I reserve for what I would call not safe for work content. Anything that
Right.
I feel like could potentially get me cancelled goes on that.
Okay.
And so the Clone Warriors series is there, but it's also on that other channel, which I'm hesitant to have my name associated with. Because it's I mean it's vulgar. It's kind of what I've realized in a way is it's kind of me giving a middle finger to YouTube. I guess taking the sort of South Park approach of how much can we get away with. It doesn't have any followers. I'm not trying to monetize it. It's just sort of shock comedy humor, which is it's more than racy. It's vulgar. It's objectification of women. There's violence. There's drug references. There's basically
It's your
all the
alter
sort of stuff
ego,
that
is
would
by the sounds of it.
yeah, and so the original Once for Clone Warriors series is incorporated into that because
Okay.
what the channel is I do all the little sort of snippet videos, but then I cut it together, and I guess the inspiration is a show like Robot Chicken, where you have sort of like a lot of sort of very unrelated little sort of sketches one after another, and then they make up sort of 10-minute episodes. So that's what that is. So yes, it is available to view. I
But
just don't want you
you
to
don't
think
want
any
us to
less of
link
me
to
by
it, is what you're
subjecting
saying.
to you.
Yeah, fair enough. All right.
Yeah. So it is available. That was a long way of saying yes, it is available. I'm just not sure if I want to share it.
All right. Well, tell us a bit more then about the development of your journey with machinima then, because the film that we're going to be reviewing this month was a 2015.
That's when it was released,
Ah,
yes.
okay.
That's not when it was finished. And there's quite a story about that.
Cool.
Yeah. So I don't actually know when we started it. As I said, I'd done a number of things. And there's certainly a couple of unfinished projects. I did another project which didn't get finished using Star Wars Battlefront, which was about sort of AWOL droids, battle droids that had gone AWOL and were just sort of trying to have a party while the war was going on. And I made a trailer for that, and I think one of the things that was holding me back is amongst my sort of friend group at the time, I was the only one that was really into filmmaking. I could certainly rope them in for voice acting and stuff like that and helping me out with the machinima puppetry, but all of the production work very much fell to me. And so yeah, if I didn't feel like a project had legs or if I just got tired of it, I sort of so there was quite a few unfinished projects. Um, but and I was using Far Cry 2 for a bit, trying to make something in that. When I discovered Red Faction Guerrilla, which was the game that I made Optimism Bias in, I just it something really clicked there in terms of I think just the aesthetic and I think the opportunities in what the engine can do, having a very sort of destructible environment and it ticked a lot of boxes. It was a very difficult engine to make machinima in,
Mm,
um, largely because it's a third-person game,
mm,
and so it's not like Halo where you could essentially just set up one character as the camera, and that would be your feed. In all of our footage, there's going to be a character in the middle of a screen because it's a third-person game. There's no way to get that first-person look. And the game does have a spectator mode, which allows you to sort of see from various angles in the map. But they gave us all our big wide shots that we needed, but getting in for all our close-ups and all that sort of stuff proved very tricky. The way that I overcame that, because I was getting sort of quite demoralized with it, thinking, I really love this game, but I just don't think I can make machinima with it because it's a third-person game. And at the time, 4K monitors they existed, but they were very, very expensive. Um, and I came across I had this idea. I thought, if I had a 4K image, could I potentially record everything in third person mode and then just take that 1080p corner of the screen over the shoulder of the character and sort of cut that out and use that as my sort of feed for the film. But I didn't have a 4K monitor. I ended up finding this. It was an IBM brand medical imaging monitor from Japan, like this very high resolution monitor, not at all designed for gaming or anything like that, but it did have the resolution that I needed. I picked that up off eBay, and that sort of was what got us over the line and got me a cheap 4K monitor. So that's how we ended up doing it. Mostly is by actually just taking that sort of HD corner of the screen, recording everything with fraps and getting the screen capture in 4K, and then cropping out that sort of corner of the screen. Um, so it was quite a technical sort of process to actually be able to make machinima in the game. There are a few other limitations, like the maximum duration of a multiplayer match was 30 minutes, and that presented a lot of issues where, because the environment is so destructible, if you had, a building that had been partially damaged or whatever it was, you would then have continuity issues if you had to rehost the game and then try and make that damage look exactly the same as it
oh,
had
yeah.
prior been. But a very talented coder friend of mine found a way to mod the game to give us, I think 3 hour duration or something like that. So there are a lot of technical hurdles that we needed to overcome just to actually make it a game that would actually record footage in. Um, and so I think that took quite a long time to just get to a point. I don't know how long it took from the sort of seed of I really want to make machinima in this game to I think if I can actually get some usable footage out of this now. At that time, I was much more networked with sort of the sort of Melbourne local film industry and had a lot of other people who are friends of mine who were filmmakers. And I approached this show very much like a live action film shoot, um, where we were all in the same room. We had a bunch of computers in a room. We had the big 4K screen that everyone could see. I had different roles assigned. I had a separate cinematographer, so I didn't have to frame up the camera. I had a friend of mine named Rudy Sierra, who's a very talented cinematographer and also a gamer, who was just really great at getting a lot of really interesting shots using an Xbox controller. And so we very much approached the shoot like a live action shoot where we're all in one space. Everyone could see the director's screen. Everyone could see how their character was interacting with that. And and even that's difficult because just getting characters to walk in a straight line and all those sorts of things can be difficult.
Yeah.
But you also get a lot of happy accidents where, just like in live action filmmaking, you choreograph a scene and then you execute it, and then something happens which is either just looks really cool or is really funny, and you end up sort of modifying what your original plan was just based on the happy accident. So that's sort of how we approached it, but it was very much like there were my filmmaking friends who were interested in it, but a lot of the shots from the show have a lot of characters on screen at once, and for all of those, we weren't doing any compositing. So anytime you've got sort of a dozen people on screen, that means we had a dozen computers in my house, sort of all linked up. Um, and the only way I could sort of get people to do the puppetry was say to my non-filmmaking friends, hey, we're going to have a LAN party, and we're going to do a couple of hours of this show that I want to make, and I'll supply pizza and beer, and then after we can play video games, and sort of that's how I sort of shot listed. Okay, what are the shots that only have a couple of characters in them, and then just me and my filmmaking mates would shoot those. And then whenever we had sort of crowd scenes, we'd have these LAN parties where we'd go and get all those. Which, you know, the more people drank, the harder it got to sort of
Yeah.
get people to actually focus and not shoot each other while we were filming. But that's, I mean, everyone was a volunteer, so that's just what we had to work with. But the result of that was it took quite a long time to make. I think that series we were filming probably over, I would say, at least 2 years anyway.
That's brilliant.
On weekends and whenever I could sort of rope people in, and then I'd be sort of handling the post production by myself because that's sort of something I'm very familiar with.
Uh-huh.
And I was just very lucky with a lot of the contacts I had. I was living with a sound engineer at the time, and so he did all my sound design and sound mixing and all that stuff. He did all the voice recording for me with all these very expensive microphones. A lot of actors that I'd met on live action shoots. I managed to rope them in to do the voice acting for the cast. So everyone was volunteering, but it was as a result, it was just something that took a very long time.
I think the
Um,
professionalism comes through with it. It looks absolute and sounds absolutely amazing, actually. You did a cracking job with it. I guess
Thank you. I mean, yeah, I think post production is probably where I sort of feel very comfortable, and so that sort of allowed me, once I had all the footage, that sort of allowed me to just sort of really hone it, and then getting my sound engineer guy to hone the sound. Um,
yeah. What you're the sort of things that you're describing, though, are very much the sort of the way that Hugh and the original early machine pre YouTube stuff,
mhm.
they would have done it exactly the same way.
Yeah.
They all got together physically and they all,
Well,
you
I
know,
saw your episode from a week or two ago
yeah, the artery
about
machinima
that.
one.
Yeah, and
Mm.
that felt very familiar in terms
Yeah, I
of the
bet. I bet.
how everything was laid out. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, in many ways, Hugh, it sounds in terms of what you were doing as well was a little bit anomalous because um, Hugh and you, by the sounds of it, had a sort of a more professional approach to the way that you were going about making it in the first place. Where a lot of that early machinima, the red versus blue folks, for one
Hmm.
thing, was a kind of a little bit ad hoc in the way that it
Hmm.
was made, and then just sort of throw it out and see what happens. Although to be fair, Bernie was professionally trained and very into his sort of comedy side of things, and the likes of Paul, professional animator, of course, Friedrich, and a professional artist and what have you. So there was quite a lot of technical skill amongst those early creators, but it's not quite made in the same way anymore. I guess, do you think you could achieve the same sort of thing with the tools that you've got available now for machinimators?
Yeah, I think, and sort of with with those sort of early days, I think. that sort of ad hoc sort of approach, I think, was very much around, the demand and the need for regular releases. Once they had the popularity, it's like, okay, we need to keep churning this out. Um, this, I feel like I was quite late to the game, generally speaking, with Optimism Bias in terms of the machinima bubble had very much burst by the time we released it. And um, yeah, I mean, it was originally made as a sort of 20-something minute film, um,
Right.
rather than as a mini series. And so that's why it wasn't so much, make an episode, release it, and then, you know, make the next one and release it. And I learned a lot about, I think, distribution and I guess, I mean, if you look at Rooster Teeth as an example, I think, one of the things that I think really helped them was the popularity of Halo, which, they've spoken about a lot. And I think whilst I certainly wanted to make Machinima in a game that other people hadn't made yet, and whilst I'm a big fan of Red Faction Guerrilla myself, it wasn't a hugely successful game. It did well and people liked it, but didn't have the following the likes of Halo.
Mm.
And I think when you're dealing with the noise floor of YouTube and just how much stuff, even 2015 when we released this, um, I don't know if I think maybe the trailer has over 1,000 views, but all of the other episodes of Optimism Bias have under 1,000 views. Um,
Which is a
and
shame, really, because I would have thought it would get more.
well,
It's your marketing.
I don't necessarily. Well, and part of this is ego, of course, but I don't see that as a reflection of its quality because
No. Mm.
all of the comments are positive. There's only likes, there's no dislikes. I just think it's a little bit too niche. Um, Red Faction Guerrilla didn't have the sort of penetration that games like Grand Theft Auto and Halo and games like this have. Um, and so it was already a niche market in terms of people who would watch the show because they liked the game. Um, and then also, I just think generally speaking, as I said, I feel like I was late to the game in terms of releasing a professional machinima series. Um, in terms of just the popularity of machinima at the time. And as an example, we submitted this to the Melbourne International Animation Festival in 2014, and we were the only machinima submission. They had a machinima category, but we're the only, and
Right.
I think that's sort of very telling as to sort of where machinima was sitting in 2014. I like to think machinima has grown in popularity since. I think there was sort of like that early millennium sort of
Yeah.
surge and then a big drop off. And
I don't,
timing wise, yeah,
I was gonna say, I don't think .com helped very much,
sure. Yeah, that's a
unfortunately.
bad taste in a lot of people's mouth.
Well, they weren't really about machinima. They were just about eyes on
Yeah.
user-generated content, really. More about promotion of the games themselves, I think. So, now all of that's sort of over. I think what you've got is a lot more genuinely creative material in whatever form that it's been made that gets viewed because of what it is. And I think you're right. There was a point in time when people would pick up machinima based on the game that it was made in. But from our perspective on the podcast, I certainly think what we like to pick up and reflect upon is that good machinima doesn't just stay in that gaming community. It tells a story beyond and appeals to a wider audience. And yours most definitely does. Although there are a lot of in-jokes in it. I think that's the challenge. But I think probably these days, so many more people get what those in-jokes are about
Hmm.
non-player characters and what have you. And the other references to real life, which everybody loves, the sort of the role of HR and
Hmm.
all of those kind of stupid gamers and what have you. I mean, there's some real comedy in the way that you've set it up, which to me isn't really just about the game, but is it should appeal to a wider audience, I think. And that's definitely what Red versus Blue did. It
Hmm.
definitely, transcended those folks that were just there for Halo to,
Hmm.
although you're right, it did sort of tip into that. But it was a breakout piece for Machinima, and it's what generated, along with all the other people that were working with content that was also sort of breakout at the time. It's what attracted a wider audience to the techniques, the quality of the stories that were told, the different ways that you could think about animation, and yeah, just generally interesting ways to tell short stories,
Hmm.
which of course YouTube jumped in on the back of. And
Yeah.
its story is, continued. I think one of the biggest challenges these days is getting eyeballs on content with an algorithm that sort of doesn't reflect the bias of the marketing machine, which I
I
think
mean,
you've got
it's
.com to thank for, really.
yeah. I think just YouTube in general, and and this was very eye-opening for me because the second channel that I told you about that I started up just as a test. I uploaded my first video to that new channel, and then from a different computer, I logged in with my first YouTube channel, and then did a search for the video that I'd uploaded with the other channel
And you couldn't
with the
find it.
exact name,
Yeah.
invisible,
Yeah.
because it's a channel with zero followers and one video.
Yeah.
So I think yeah. I mean, I thankfully I don't have aspirations as a YouTuber. I'm not trying to earn a living from this. This is just about wanting
Yeah.
to make stuff
And
and
share
enjoying
it
the process. Yeah,
and see
absolutely.
what folks have to say about it. And
And the collaborative process as well.
mm,
It's just a lot of fun.
yeah.
Um, but going back to what I mentioned before about our release, um, it's a bit of a convoluted story. I think we actually finished Optimism Bias in 2013. I'd have to go back into my files and
Oh,
look at that. But essentially, what happened was my producer on the show, Brian Temple Smith, he's a guy originally from Austin, and yeah, did an amazing job just with the business side of things. He actually reached out to once he sort of had seen he first sort of came on board because we were mates and he just wanted to help us out with the project. But when he saw the quality of what we were making, he was like, I think we can sell this, which is bonkers, generally speaking, to just the idea of selling machinima in the first place,
yeah.
unless you get a licensing deal like Rooster Teeth did. But he essentially he rang up he Nordic Games, which are the publisher and rights holder. They didn't make it. It was made by a company called Volition, which are now defunct and then were incorporated into Nordic Games. But he called them up and said, "Hey, we've got this thing. Is there anything you can do with it?" I wasn't on the calls, so I only have information that he relayed to me. But it was all very exciting. He They were leading up to their remaster of Red Faction Guerilla. And essentially, he ended up speaking to the CEO of Nordic Games. It's just, he's just one of those guys who just knows how to talk, I guess. That's Brian I'm talking about. But he ended up getting put onto this business development manager or some sort of role in that regard, who just loved what we were doing and was like, yeah, we can definitely do something together. We're doing the remaster of Red Faction Guerrilla. We let's talk. And so I was super excited, thinking, I never intended that this is something that was going to be commercially viable. It was just something that I was making for YouTube. For obvious reasons, it's, you can't sell
Yeah.
machinima because IP issues and blah, blah, blah. But to actually be talking with the rights holders was really exciting. I had already decided that I was going to take a sabbatical in 2015 because you know, I'd just come off a slew of a bunch of long form projects, feature films, and I was just, I needed a break. And so I was planning to take a year off. My producer, Brian, was going to the Cannes Film Festival for a feature film that he'd produced. And he'd organized a meeting with Nordic Games that are based in Austria. I was going to be in Europe anyway, because I was coming over here for a gap year, essentially. He was coming over for Cannes. And he organized us a meeting at Nordic Games, and I was like, okay, this is it. And it was quite heartbreaking, actually, what happened. But essentially, as from what I understand, there was some sort of company restructure at Nordic Games, and the business development manager who loved our show and really wanted to work with us either didn't work there anymore or was now working in a different role. And the person that replaced him just didn't understand what the show was. He was
Yeah.
like, "Is it a game? We make games." And we're like, "No, no, it's a show." He's like, "Yeah, we make games." He just didn't get it, and that was the end. And so we didn't even get the meeting in the end. I just sort of
Oh, that's a
kiboshed it. So
shame.
it was. I just I think about what could have been. So you know, we we took it to South by Southwest as well, not as in the festival, but Brian and I were both going, um, just because he's from Austin, and I've always wanted to go, and he said, well, while we're there, let's see if we can shop it around. So there was just this delaying. Let's not upload it to YouTube yet. Let's see if we can actually do something with it first.
Uh, yeah.
Um, and that went sort of on and on and on. So when we did finally, I mean, we submitted it to the Melbourne International Animation Festival, and as I said, it was the only submission. And he said, "Well, we really love it, and we can't enter it in the festival because you've got no competition. But would you like to essentially do a showcase and hold a machinima panel at the Melbourne International Animation Festival?" Which we did. So that was essentially the premiere of the 20 something minute version of the film. And then we went to South by Southwest. And then afterwards, we just sort of said, yeah, you know, I'd been sitting on it for so long, and when you've made something that you're proud of, you want people to see it.
Yeah.
And all the other people that volunteered on it, sorry, it's my dog barking. All the other people that volunteered on it, they put in so many hours, and just sort of sitting on it, and so eventually in 2015, that's when I decided, well, rather than releasing this as a 20 something minute film, I'm going to chop it up. I think it sits well. I think it sits better as a series, than as a single piece, anyway. And so yeah, it was quite a long sort of process from actually finishing it to uploading. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a real shame. I'm really sorry to hear that, actually. You would have hit the kind of 2012, 2013 would have been the absolute peak of the dot-com
Hmm.
period. I think there were, uh, can't even remember how many millions of users there were on that channel at that point. In the in the in the millions, but like tens of millions. And I suppose really the machinima, the dedicated machinima festival period was kind of dying down a little bit because that had been going since mid 2000s till about 20. I think the last. Just thinking when the last.
I think Acme probably wrapped it up around 2007, 2008, as early as that, I think.
Did
Yeah.
yeah, I was just going to say that because I think the probably the first wave of machinima in the in Oz would have been probably no later than 2004, 5, I would have thought,
Yeah.
because Red versus Blue was 2003, and it
Hmm.
took off very quickly and garnered global interest. But I was just saying we were on the sort of the second wave of the festivals and trying to keep the interest going in in production, generating interest in delivering high quality content with reasonable quality production values. That was always our thing, keeping going, which was sat in contrast a little bit to what com.com was up to. And we kept the Machinima Expo going.
Hmm.
Well, various folks did, up until about 2013, 2014, I think.
Hmm.
And after that, that kind of just faded. And then, .com was on the wane, um, and then over a series of mergers and what have you, finally was switched off in kind of 2019 with I
Well,
don't know
I
how
mean, I
many.
even signed up to the Machinima partner program,
Did you? Yeah.
and I got rejected
Did you?
because I didn't. Well, and I'm thankful I did. Otherwise, I would have,
Ah,
I mean,
yeah.
of course, I keep backups of everything I make. It wouldn't have been lost content, but yeah,
Well, it
I'm
would have
glad
been
I.
lost content because anybody that signed up to that, they were signing away their content in
Yeah.
perpetuity.
Hmm.
So, even though there were tens of thousands of films on those channels, they wouldn't be able to use them now because they don't own the content anymore. So I think you had a lucky escape.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's kind of ironic, really, that Rooster Teeth, which is also, of course, Warner has also now wound all of that up. But Bernie's now bought back the brand. I don't know if you
Hmm.
saw that a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. No, I listened to his podcast, so I'm sort of well up on that as well.
That's also I'm really delighted to hear that. And I think his understanding is basically, or his intention is basically just so that the brand doesn't get asset stripped and he can work on nice projects that he wants to work on going forwards,
Yeah.
which at some point I would hope would be machinima projects because they were very good at doing that kind of aspect of
Yeah,
it.
I imagine he's probably fed up with machinima himself, but I think he would be willing to support other
Yeah.
creators that
I th
were
I think that's
that
where
were
they
making
went
stuff.
to really with
Yeah.
the whole the Rooster Teeth and bringing in all the different creator groups
Hmm.
under that kind of banner. So look, what else are you going to do? I mean, have you been completely burnt with machinima? Are you still working in machinima?
Well, I mean, my not safe for work channel that I mentioned, I still semi-regularly upload to, but that is, that's sketch comedy. I wouldn't call it narrative. It's like I said, it's sort of like a very robot chicken-esque sort of format where it's just a bunch of sort of sketches one after another. In terms of narrative machinima, essentially where I got to. So after we finished Optimism Bias, and I had big plans for Optimism Bias in terms of I'd already sort of planned out subsequent seasons, and essentially it was sort of a similar sort of story to Wreck-It Ralph, where you have all these NPCs that I would have actually traveling into different games. And so season two probably
Uh,
wouldn't have been in Optimism Bias. It would have been in a different game, but the same characters, the same voice cast.
yeah, yeah,
So that
yeah.
was what I was planning to do with it. And I sort of was trying to foreshadow that with Cheryl's character, which obviously is the drone from Half-Life, and sort of
Yes.
trying to sort of give the idea that, video games as a universe are all sort of interconnected and these NPCs are just,
Yeah.
characters that so
Just
that's what I
just
really
putting on
want.
a skin basically and
Yeah,
sitting in another.
basically.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Um, and
You should
so
do
that's
it.
what I mean, I would love to. Where I sort of got to with Machinima, is so before I left Australia, a couple of other filmmaker friends and I, there was there's a film festival in Australia called the Sci-Fi Film Festival, which is based in Sydney, and they were still running a machinima category. As this would have been in 2014, and they were one of the few sort of festivals that were still running. And I said I wanted to have sort of one last hurrah before I left the country and make a short, still using Red Faction Guerilla because it's just something we had a workflow that worked and we could sort of pump it out with not having to do any sort of technical R&D. And so we wrote this short, which I thought was really funny. And then, life got in the way and we just never got around to shooting it. And then I left the country and then what was meant to be a gap year ended up me actually settling in Europe. And it was actually during lockdown that I was going through, one of the things that I kept myself occupied was just, going through my hard drive and just sort of sorting through my files and stuff like that. And I came across this short film script that I'd completely forgotten about. And I was laughing out loud. And I was just like, that's really funny. That it's a real shame we never made that. And so I got in touch with one of the co-writers and said, hey, how do you feel about fleshing this out? Um, and writing something a little bit longer based around this. And that was our lockdown project. Is we sort of wrote what ended up being like an 85-page
My
screenplay.
goodness.
Like, yeah. Um, so, and I think it's really good in terms of the writing. Um, and so we sort of I got to work with it was like thinking, well, this is the only way to feasibly do a feature length thing for me. It would be using machinima because I can't do it live action and animation. It was the only sort of you know financially feasible way of doing it, and so I got into research and development using Red Faction Guerilla, which I was familiar with. And they had their remastered version now, so it was better graphics and all that sort of stuff. I hired a modder to make a camera mod where so we could basically detach the camera from the over
Yeah.
the shoulder sort of view and just fly it around anywhere we wanted in the game, which was, game changer for us. I didn't have to do any of that cropping a section out of the corner of the screen or anything anymore. I had complete control over the camera. I'd also started working with one of the other things that I wanted to do differently was rather than having characters with helmets on, so you didn't have to worry about lip sync, was thinking, well, okay, how can we actually do some stuff with faces? I did some tests with some software called Crazy Talk,
Oh yeah.
which is by
Reillusion.
Reillusion, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
where and there's a test on this on my YouTube channel actually, where I did a test where I would actually see if I could use a combination of Crazy Talk and After Effects to get the characters in Red Faction Guerrilla that weren't wearing a helmet to speak, and it worked really well. So I spent quite a lot of time sort of R&D on that, um, and got quite far along with it, and then. I don't know, maybe it was part of the bad experience we had with Nordic games and stuff like that, where I was so excited about the writing, thinking this is really good writing. Um, and I co-wrote it with a couple of other people. Um, and I just felt like it felt like a shame to not be able to sell it, given that it was long form. And that
Yes.
sort of around that time, that was when virtual production and Unreal Engine and all these things was really starting to gain
Yeah.
traction.
Hmm.
And so that became one of my other lockdown projects was sort of learning Unreal
Yeah.
Engine and then
Gen up
thinking,
on that. Good idea, I think.
yeah. And so that then moved to sort of using a combination of Unreal Engine and iClone Character Creator and sort of that suite of tools to then start building that out. And I've got a number of people working on that show now. It's called the Goduncan Experiment.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Um, and we've got an EPK for that I can send you if you'd like to have more information about that.
Absolutely.
But um, that has sort of gradually gone from machinima project to virtual production project to now it's essentially conventional animation where I've got an animator who's doing everything in Cinema 4D. We're still doing it in Unreal Engine. That's still our environment that we're capturing everything. But and so it's still technically virtual production, but and we're using motion capture suits and stuff for a lot of the animation. But I would say it's sitting more in the animation camp now than in the virtual production camp, which is really great that I've been able to attract a bunch of people to the project to sort of bring that level of professionalism, but it also makes it really, really slow because it's essentially a full-blown animation production, which I've got no experience doing. So I'm learning how to direct, concept artists and modelers and riggers and all that sort of stuff. We have finished doing all the voice recording though, which I'm very pleased with, and that's something that I felt very comfortable doing. I had a lot of experience doing. So that part of it, I was like, okay, well, at least I got the voice recorded. Really, really pleased with the voice cast we got. A lot of people with so there's Bav and Leonie playing the two female leads who have a lot of credits in both TV and video games. Leonie was in Cyberpunk
Oh, wow.
and
Yeah.
Bav was in Doctor Who, and both of them have been in sort of really high profile things. Our male lead is actually Miles Luna from Rooster Teeth, so it's all kind of gone full
Oh,
circle. So our male voice lead, which I saw a post on his social media saying that he was available for hire as a voice artist. Because obviously once he'd gone independent, and I just reached out to him and yeah, that was that. So I mean these are all paid voice
yeah,
artists,
I
of
was
course,
going to
not
say, it sounds
volunteers.
like you've gone from sort of indie to pro with budget management and all
I
the
mean,
lot
it's
now.
still very indie. It's self-funded.
Yeah.
So the plan is to try and make a vertical slice, sort of little 1 minute sort of piece.
Uh-huh.
Use that to try and get some investment to try and make a pilot, and then use that to either make a feature film or a series. But it's very slow. It's very slow. It's one of those things. Not only myself, but all of the other people involved are all freelancers who are working on other projects, and it's
Yeah.
just really difficult to get the planets to align to a point where we can all sort of
It's
get stuff done.
it's
So
kind of tricky, isn't it? But very timely probably because, there's an awful lot of interest in game to film type transformations at the moment, isn't there? All the things that you see on Netflix and what have you, have all got a history
sure, I
in
mean
this.
this show is not video game related. It's completely new. So this is a complete separation from Optimism Bias.
Okay, well, I was thinking
Completely
Red
new show.
Faction Guerrilla. No?
Well, that's how we originally started making the show in Red Faction Guerrilla, and
So has
then
it no
we've
longer got any
complete.
aesthetic to it then?
No,
Mm,
no,
okay.
it's completely removed from Red Faction now. It's we were using that as our sort of sandbox to play in, and now we're using a completely different sandbox. So yeah, there's not really any video game. I mean, it's certainly video game adjacent in that it's being shot in Unreal Engine, but that's about
Right.
the only link there. Um, so um, and that's been that's been difficult in itself. And one of the reasons that I love machinima is the speed at which you can produce stuff. Not that optimism bias was made quickly, but um,
Yeah.
potentially things can be made quickly. And so I started working on another show, which is because I'm often, in a holding pattern, waiting for stuff
Yeah.
to come through on the Gedanken experiment before I can do any more work. So I've got another show I've been working on called Welcome to the Betterverse, and that is deliberately lo-fi. And my intention with that is so that I can make sort of again be in that sort of mode where I can make stuff a lot more quickly, not being too worried about aesthetics and lighting and that sort of stuff. Something that's far more focused on the writing and the voice performance and not getting too bogged down in the visuals. But the elevator pitch on that is it's a fictional metaverse, which is essentially a scam. It's just a cash grab. It's people log into this metaverse and they're immediately being accosted by this bot, essentially trying to get them to upgrade to a premium account and get a subscription, and trying to sell them in-game currency and all this sort of stuff. But the actual world doesn't have any content. It's just it's just this sort of barren AI generated place. But that then becomes sort of a meeting ground for these people who sort of log in, and then the content comes out of the interactions that they have, all the while this bot is trying to convince them to upgrade, and they're just quite happy with the free version. So that's essentially the story. But it's um, all of the characters are action figures that I've photo scanned and then rigged in AccuRig, and it's all very janky and the animations sort of. But given that it's meant to be this sort of AI generated world that's just sort of a scam and a cash grab, it just sort of it sort of fits very well with that. So I wanted to make something that it's written into the story that it's not supposed to look particularly
Mm.
sort of the animation is sort of very rough. So I don't have to worry too much about that because it's sort of on brand. So that's that. And then the Goduncan experiment, which is sort of a light-hearted sort of science fiction, far more narrative, I wouldn't call it a comedy. It's more of a light-hearted sci-fi, but it does get pretty heavy in the sort of stuff that happens. So that's sort of very much in the drama camp. And that the plans with that is to ideally go to video on demand streaming. Well, that's not something that we want to sort of put on YouTube. We're hoping to actually make something that we can sell and actually um, whatever streaming platform will take it essentially. But I mean, it may end up going on YouTube if we can't make a go of it. But that's the plan with that. But I just wanted to have something on the side that I can just sort of um, yeah, whenever I have an idea for a joke, that I can just sort of incorporate that into something.
Sounds like
Just have
you're
a little
really
sketch.
trying to sort of professionalize the machinima side of things into a kind of a more useful workflow for your career development, really. That sounds like you're thinking about
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. I think, what Machinima has given to me is the opportunity to write and direct.
Mm.
Um, and I have made live action short films, not many, and I have a couple of, a number of unfinished live action short films, which are certainly not abandoned. They're just maybe were very ambitious in terms of what were required in terms of visual effects and stuff like that, which is all happening, but it's very slow for the reasons that I've mentioned on the other projects.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
live action is very expensive. The last short film that I made, it was one actor in a backyard, shot over 2.5 days, and it still cost thousands of pounds because being in the film industry myself, I don't like to ask people to work for free, and I'm certainly not paying them their regular rates, but even paying people, a fraction of what they're worth, it still gets very expensive very quickly. So what Machinima has given me the opportunity to do really is to write and direct and actually finish stuff and to be able to work with voice performers, which is something that I absolutely adore doing. And I think, with both of these shows that I'm working on, it just allows me to do things that I wouldn't have been able to do whilst I am working in the film industry. The majority of my work is very technical. I'm working on big films and big TV shows, but I'm in the camera department and doing very technical stuff.
Mm.
And so it does give you exposure to the industry and watching other directors work and all that sort of stuff. But actually, the only way to actually have opportunities there is to essentially make them for yourself. And when they're live action, they can get very expensive. And I very much treat this show, um, the Betterverse show, like a machinima sort of workflow. It's all being done in iClone, and iClone, as I'm sure you know, you can control characters with an Xbox controller.
Mm. Mm.
Um, there's a bit of motion capture suit stuff in there, but that's usually overkill for what's required. So that's much more in the machinima camp, in Unreal Engine and iClone, um, than the Goduncan experiment. But yeah, I think you're right. I think I'm sort of using machinima as a way to hone my craft as a director, um, without breaking the bank, essentially.
Well, that's always a good idea. Have
Yeah.
you been following Sam Crane's Grand Theft Auto experiment? Have you been looking at that documentary and its journey through to distribution?
I don't know. Maybe it doesn't ring a bell.
Ah, okay.
Um,
I'll send you some links because you might find that particularly interesting. Because one thing that strikes me that's particularly challenging, I think, with machinima is getting a break or thinking about how to get a break with it. Because there's a certain set of, well, there's clearly a perception with it unless you get that kind of break. But right at the moment, Sam's got quite a long way through the processes with various showcases, various festivals that it's been selected at, culminating in a distribution deal which has seen it go to, I don't know whether it's on Prime or Netflix or it's even being released in cinemas as well now. So
Wow. And that's
yeah,
Grand Theft Auto 4 or
it's a
5 or
five.
5.
It's a Hamlet production. That it was another lockdown project. It was a production of Hamlet made in Grand Theft
That's
Auto.
starting to ring a bell, actually, now that
Yeah,
you mentioned the Hamlet side of things. Yeah.
exactly. And so that's got a lot of interest, which has raised the profile again of machinima. So we seem to be in like a third wave of interest in machinima
Hmm.
productions. And the other one that's been longlisted or shortlisted, I think, for one of the Oscars one of the Oscars categories is something called, I think it's called The Life of Ibelin, which is quite a sad story about a young boy. I don't know whether he was ill and passed away or whether something more sinister happened to him. But it's a documentary again, I think, about this young man who lived his life in, I think, World of Warcraft. And so again, that has gained an awful lot of interest as well because that's also machinima.
Hmm.
Or
Right.
so looking at how they've managed to get through their journey might be a really interesting,
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely.
way to reflect on it. And then, of course, it may or not be the right sort of route, but festivals like Oberhausen have been very supportive of machinima of late. Primarily, I think, from their perspective, they're very interested in avant-garde filmmaking, so it's not necessarily something that's going to immediately appeal to you, I
Are they
wouldn't have
based in
thought.
Berlin?
They are, yes, Oberhausen. No,
I'm not familiar.
I can't remember whether I flew into Berlin or Munich for it. I can't remember,
Right.
or Dusseldorf. It might have been. I don't know. It's what Germany.
Hmm.
But yes, they had a whole section on machinima at a film festival, not last year, but the year before.
Right.
And it was one of the biggest retrospectives of machinima in a long established animation film festival.
I
Oh, not
wonder if
animation
it's the
film.
same one. I spent when I was on my gap here, I spent quite a few months in Berlin, um, and got quite involved with the creative communities there. And there were people saying, "Oh, you really should put your work in this Machinima film festival." I wonder if it was the same one.
No, that wouldn't be the same one. Not in those days.
Well, this was in 2015.
It wouldn't be the same. Well,
Okay,
Oberhausen, I don't think, I think is more of a short film festival.
right.
And my understanding it was the first machinima was a couple of years ago. And they did
Hmm.
so, but like I said, the point is it's generated a lot of interest in machinima, having had this major festival showcase all of this work. So I think there's demand for it. I think go for it.
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, yeah, I mean,
And keep us posted is what I was going to say. Tell us how you're getting on with it because it's certainly great to see people succeed with it. Where all of the things that you've described are things that probably Phil and Ricky and Damien would certainly have experienced with the development of their projects over the years. I mean,
mhm,
Phil can tell you some wonderful, well, they're not very similar stories to your story
mhm,
with Nordic Games, for example.
mhm.
And so would, had Hugh still been alive, he would have told you the same sort of thing. He struggled continually to get traction with game-based machinima.
Hmm.
And I think really with Red versus Blue, they were they were they were breakout because they were in the right place at the right time when things were when there was a demand for exploiting something that appeared to be successful for a particular audience. So,
Hmm.
they kind of rode a bit of a wave and were influential as a consequence of the traction that they then gained. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
it's just getting that break that's needed. But there is interest in it right now, which is useful. I
Yeah, I
think.
mean, I hope so. I do sort of feel that just generally. And as I say, I feel like, back in 2014, 15, when we originally launched this, I felt like it was a very different landscape.
Mm,
But yeah, I think there does feel like, just generally speaking, there is a new wave happening just generally in content creation. Um, and and I hope towards more narrative content as opposed to personality driven content.
yes.
Yeah, that's what I hope, because
Well, I
I
do
don't want to be
from
a vlogger.
no, but my well, I think all of us, Ricky particularly, would be able to comment on this. I think from all of our perspectives, what we're seeing is a lot of different types of storytelling that are not traditional ways of storytelling, which is refreshing and exciting
Hmm.
to see. And you can only get that with the kinds of techniques that you're talking about. You can't, if you're sort of putting on or creating stuff with massive budgets, and it's going to stick to a tried and tested formula.
Hmm.
Whereas I think you're seeing a lot more exploratory approaches to narrative storytelling now,
Yeah.
which
And
is
one thing I'm really interested in as well is just seeing what can be done in the 360 space, creating content for VR headsets, which I feel like that's something that's been on the cusp for a long time, and I think headset adoption is still quite low.
hmm,
But that's something really difficult to do in live action, is to, and I've worked on 360 films, and it's really difficult to make something. But machinima and virtual production, I think, is making something for 360 is just a setting on your export. It's how you render it out, and so maybe there can be a sort of renaissance, if you like, of being able to make content for 360, and also adapt existing stuff, um, adapt existing machinima and existing virtual production stuff that's maybe already been produced as a conventional film, that then you can actually have a 360 version of it. But I don't know, I still feel like the adoption rate's quite low, but that's something
yes,
else I'm looking into. Um, in particular with this Betterverse show, is maybe considering doing that as a 360 show rather than a YouTube series, and seeing
yeah,
seeing if there's any sort of brand partnership that I can sort of get with sort of an app developer making a 360 player or something like that. That you know, um,
yes,
yeah. So
another
that's
area where
another
there's
avenue.
a lot of development in that sort of side of thing. I was going to ask you about, are you using AI at all? Or are you looking at the roles of different generative tools like that? Have you been tempted?
Short answer, no. Um, Certainly not in any of my virtual production stuff. Um, we are looking at AI tools. Well, I wouldn't even call it AI. I would call it machine learning. My art
Yeah.
director on the Duncan experiment has been experimenting with using AI tools for essentially, texturing, adding an aesthetic, a look to all of our geometry in the show, and sort of as a way of fast tracking, essentially bringing geometry in developing an aesthetic, a look, and then applying that to the geometry and using machine learning as a way to do that to sort of as a shortcut. But I wouldn't necessarily call that generative AI. I mean, it is generative, but it's I
Yeah.
would put it more in the machine learning camp.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I still feel um, I think I just enjoy too much the process of making films anyway. And I don't necessarily have a problem with generative AI as a creative tool. And I've certainly seen a lot of really cool stuff, which couldn't have been made if
Mm.
Gen AI didn't exist. But yeah, I just like the process of making stuff anyway. So I would certainly use it for, as a shortcut to sort of get me from A to B quicker. But um, you know, for this Betterverse show, I'm I'm deliberately making it look like a lot of the assets have been made using AI, but they absolutely haven't.
Mm.
Um, it's just it's just being designed to sort of make it look that way. Um,
It's really interesting to hear you say that.
but
I was,
I keep open-minded with it
mm,
for stuff. And there's been some, so for a live action short film that I did, which is currently in post-production, I looked at there's essentially there's a daydream sequence which is the main character imagining self as a comic book character. And so I experimented with Gen AI to essentially I trained the model with a bunch of photos of this actor that I have, and then tried to generate a sort of comic book version of them, and it just didn't turn out very well. And I think that's more my lack of skill as a prompt engineer rather than the tool. I was using Stable Diffusion, but
yeah.
at the end of the day, um, I really enjoy the process of working with a concept artist and working with an illustrator and actually designing something and coming up with it, which yes, I could get something um, you know, freely, um, for want of a better term. But, I'm also just conscious of cancel culture and stuff, and, I'd hate to to spend, a really long time shooting a film of which, 2% of it was AI generated and then it got cancelled because, you got to put that disclaimer in there. So I'm just sort of a bit wary of using AI tools as well, just in
Yeah.
case there's sort of any backlash.
Kickback. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't see that necessarily being a game stopper,
Hmm.
ultimately, because I think everybody's going to be using it. It's just how it's disclosed and what it's used for. Although I must admit, I was quite concerned about what the US discussions or the outcome of their copyright discussions have been, um,
Hmm.
without, in terms of ownership and IP and what have you. That's slightly
Yeah.
concerning.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think and that's the thing that worries me as well, is because I wouldn't be using Gen AI to make something in its entirety. I would be using it to achieve some particular
yeah,
task that needed
yeah,
to be done. And I just think whenever people see that disclaimer, they were just going to assume that the entire thing has been made by AI.
yes. It's got its own problems as a discussion at the moment, I think.
Yeah.
What I was going to say was, which was really quite interesting, and I don't know exactly how close this kind of tech is. But I recently saw a video of somebody just it was just a piece of film footage where they'd used a generative AI to rebuild the it was it was a flight up a street and around a building, and they'd rebuilt in 3D just with one fly through, almost like a photogrammetry technique to create a 3D model that could then be
Not like a
sat in
Gaussian
something.
splat.
Yes, but
Yeah.
from a film,
Hmm. Yeah.
not from any, no model of walking up and down the street with a
Hmm.
with a bit of kit and what have you. It was just done. from a linear bit of footage. I mean, if you can turn models from photographs, turn turn things like that out so quickly, that surely is a game changer for creating sets and virtual sets. And,
Absolutely. I think background is definitely a place where I can see
mm,
myself using it. And often it's partially out of focus anyway.
yeah, exactly.
It's and yeah, I think it's a great tool for that sort of thing. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's on this Gedunken experiment project. I'm essentially, I I'm treating that again sort of very much like a sort of live action hierarchy where, I have an art director, I have a cinematographer, I have a production designer, and, I have a senior animator, and there's sort of a division of labor there where the use of AI tools, I'm happy to let those heads of department themselves decide if that's a tool they want to use to achieve their tasks. Um, and just essentially, as a director, just focusing on the directing and coaxing that saying, I like what you did there, but can we change this and this is working for me, this is not working for me, and not really being too worried about how they got to the end result. Um, and that's sort of quite liberating as well. Just thinking, well, I'm open to the tools being used, but yeah, that's up to them.
Brilliant. Well, look, I think we've probably reached a natural conclusion to the discussion today.
Sure.
It's been an absolute delight talking to you about the machinima work that you've been doing and to hear about the new projects that you're working on as well. We're definitely going to be looking out for those. So you'll have to let us know. I can't wait to
Hope
see
I don't
the.
keep you waiting too long.
No, well, that is what I was going to say. Please don't. And
Well, in
please.
terms of, I hope it's not too long until they're actually finished, but yeah,
Absolutely. Well, yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks very much for talking to us, and I'll look forward to hearing from you soon. And for those of you watching, I hope you've enjoyed the show. Thanks very much.
great, thank you. I'm very interested to hear, of course, about and one thing we haven't talked about is obviously, talking about what you think of optimism bias, but that will wait till when I hear you guys discussing it. I'm very interested
Absolutely.
to hear your
Yes,
feedback on
well,
it.
exactly. Well, as we sit here today, we're actually reviewing it in a couple of days' time. So I've no idea. We don't discuss with each other
Hmm.
what we each think. So we'll wait and see what the other guys think. But from my point of view, I love the humor in it. It's so dry, so witty, so observational. It's not aged
Oh,
for
thank
me.
you. That's very nice to hear.
Great stuff. All right. Thanks very
Okay,
much.
can't wait to see it. Okay, thanks for having me. Bye bye.
You're welcome. Bye bye.